welcome back. We're going to return to our interview with Daniel Stid from the Hewitt Foundation. In the old adage of time flies when you're having fun, we're having this great interview with Dan, and I realized at the end of the first round, so to speak, that I hadn't even worked my way through half my questions, and he was gracious enough to offer to continue the interview. So we're going to pretty much pick up where we left off and hopefully get through the rest of the questions. If not, maybe we'll have to twist his arm to come back another time. So Dan, welcome back for another round.
Thank you.
If this was a TV quiz show, you would have won all the money so far. You're great.
Okay. Thank you. Well,
so far,
I'll wait my check in the mail. But,
there you go. So far we talked about the history, you know, kind of your background, how this all got started, and you were starting to talk about some of the grants you've made. What I'd like to do now is maybe talk about a little bit kind of where you're going, and then like on the 3-year horizon, and then afterwards. But before we get there, I guess in listening to you talk, and it's so fascinating to hear the scope of what you're doing, do you have a feeling, like that old phrase, that the universe is expanding, that you're not actually getting your arms around the problem, that the problem's just getting bigger and your arms are getting longer?
That's a very good, I hadn't thought about that. I recently saw this great movie Interstellar, which is maybe there's a metaphor there in terms of space and time with the complexity of this problem and the number of people that are working on it from different angles. You know, I think we view this challenge as something. 2 or 3 things give us some hope or confidence despite the complexity. One is just simply by acknowledging that this is an incredibly complex, not just system, but system of subsystems. You know, at the national level, at the local level. And because it is so complex, and because change in it is going to occur not in a straightforward first this happens, then that happens, then that happens, but in a nonlinear way with all sorts of feedback loops, I think we're going in just appreciating that this is going to be really hard and complex, and we aren't quite sure whether or what can be done. And in some ways, that's what this initial period is for. We went to our board and said, give us 3 years. And we'll come back in 3 years to ascertain, A, you know, are there some issues or places where we think we can make a difference? B, are there some grantees or nonprofits, advocates, researchers that we can be investing in that we think are poised to really have this positive impact? And C, not least, are there other foundations and philanthropic funders who care about these issues? Maybe not exactly all the issues that we do or in the same way, that would be partners for us, because we aren't, again, we're a relatively small foundation. We're big in the broad scheme of things, but relative to the scale of this problem, our resources are quite small. So we see the need to really have this be a multifaceted effort that a range of philanthropies are supporting. So if you think about, you know, the acknowledgement of the fact that this is complexity, that change will take some time to materialize. It'll probably materialize in ways that right now we may not be able to fully imagine or to predict. And so because of that, we aren't looking for silver bullet solutions. There's what I call the if-only solutions. And you can name it here. If only we had public financing of campaigns, or if only we had nonpartisan redistricting, if only we had mandatory voting. You name the particular reform. You know, I think that ignores the fact that often those reforms can't be put into place systematically because the fact that they need to be rolled out across all 50 states in a lot of instances, or if they're put in place, they may not work as intended, or in fact, they may even have untoward consequences. And you know, we see that here in California, where, for example, we have the direct balloting on a number of questions. The origination of that was that 100 years or so ago in the progressive era, there was a sense that special interest had captured the state legislature in Sacramento, which led to the rise of direct democracy in California. Well, what's happening is paradoxically now, the process to get on the ballot and the signature gathering and vetting and organizing has itself become quite expensive, and one that's often controlled by the same special interest that led to the rise of direct democracy in the first place. So there are paradoxes to democratic reforms and unintended consequences. And so because we're treading lightly and aware that anything that we think would be the answer may not be or may not work in the ways we intended. There's a humility that comes with that. But our hope would be over time that if it's not any one thing, there may be a range of small changes that have ripple effects that bring about a more positive outcome. And I think one of the things about complex systems is that they often change in subtle ways in response to a range of different actions that end up working together to create something quite different from the original starting point. And that's basically a premise of what we're up to.
So you'll have this 3-year period.
Yes.
How will you define success when you get to the end of the 3 years? What will Dan take to his board
Sure.
that you think will allow you to say we've succeeded?
So I think one is so success. We won't have succeeded in 3 years' time. What we may know, and this was what would lead us to continue to invest here, is are there issues where we've already seen some places where we can make a difference, or we're confident that we can? So, can we make a difference? Are there organizations that we could fund to make that difference? Are there grantees and leaders and advocates in place that we could support? Because remember, we aren't doing this work directly. We're a foundation that supports others to do this work. So it could be a case that we could totally envision, well, this would be the solution, but if there aren't grantees in place, or we can't help create or cultivate grantees to work on those issues, our money's not going to make any difference. So, are there issues where we can make a difference? Are there grantees we can make a difference with? And then the third component, again, is are there philanthropic co-funders that we could work with to advance these positive changes? So if we can say those three things to our board, that's not success in terms of changing U.S. democracy, but I think it would leave us confident that, okay, we made this initial bet, let's now make a 5 or 10 year bet and have a more sustained initiative focusing on those issues and those partners that we think will be especially fruitful for us.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear about the partnering. A good friend of mine operates a foundation in Chicago, and they're focusing on early childhood education, and they have this large collaborative working group of foundations that all center on the same issue. I'm wondering, in your sense, do you think at the end of the 3 years, if you identify, let's borrow from a TV show, the top 10 reasons kind of a thing, do you think you would peel off one reason to each foundation and let them kind of run with that ball? Or do you think it'll be necessary to tie all 10 together still in a larger sense?
Yes, well, it's a very good, so I think it will be more the former. And that someone once said, foundations are funny institutions. There are regulations in the tax code with respect to how much money we have to give away each year, and how in the ways in which we can give it away, and who we can and can't give to. But really, foundations are ultimately accountable to themselves and to their boards. And so someone once joked that, I don't know if I get this exactly right, that collaboration among foundations is a unnatural act between non-consenting institutions. And basically that it's because foundations are really only accountable unto themselves, the incentives to collaborate or to cooperate are not as strong as we might like. However, that's in general. I think here, there's some really good news in that we're already, and this is a key thrust of what we're trying to do, is to be actively reaching out and working with other foundations that care about this issue. Now, and in fact, one of the first things we did was just say, well, how much are foundations spending each year to support and improve the health of our system of government? We didn't really know the answer to that. So there's a great...
Do you know it now?
We know now. So there's a great organization called the Foundation Center. And your viewers can Google this. If you Google Foundation Funding for U.S. Democracy, Foundation Funding for U.S. Democracy, that will take you to a website that's hosted by the Foundation Center. And we worked over the course of the past year with 7 other foundations that, like us, care about the health of our system of government. And we developed a data classification scheme, and then gathered all the data that the Foundation Center has at its disposal about all the grants made by the 1,000 largest foundations in the U.S. And we said, okay, where and how are foundations funding different aspects of U.S. democracy? We broke it out into campaigns and elections, voter and public engagement, governing institutions and processes, and media and information. So those were our categories. Then in each of those, we had subcategories. Well, on an annual basis, in a given year in the U.S., nearly $750 million is being invested by philanthropic foundations in research and advocacy and nonprofit work on those different dimensions. So $750 million. That's not small change. That's getting close to real money. And now, to answer your question, we aren't suggesting, nor would it be possible to say, well, every foundation should care about this issue or that issue. But certainly, I think we can get a lot more done if we're aware of who's spending what in which area, and who's prioritizing what. So we're clearly focused on this problem of polarization and the functioning of Congress. Other foundations are focusing on other issues. So, for example, our colleagues at the MacArthur Foundation in Chicago have done some great work around supporting journalism. Our colleagues at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund in New York are doing some really interesting work about changing the culture of how we talk about public success, and you know, the typical narrative of civic engagement is bad things happening to our public resources, or well, there's actually a lot of good things that are happening due to proactive citizenship, and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund is trying to tell those positive stories in ways that will allow all of us to appreciate, wow, a lot of good things could happen when citizens pull together to get things done. Those are a couple of examples. That's not work that we're doing. We're very supportive of it. And by each of us kind of having a niche and working in that niche, but being aware of what the whole is, we'll also be able to identify areas where maybe there's not enough funding and there needs to be more. So I think it's not full-scale orchestration or you know, kind of an integrated plan, but there is a collaboration there that could be quite powerful.
So one last question, and I promised you a curveball. I think that a lot of what you're doing now is kind of defining the problem, so to speak. If
Yes.
my words, not yours.
Yeah.
When do you see the point when you would start moving over to the how do we find solutions side? That's part of the question. And the other part is, you define your problem as a focus on the congressional level. As you get into this, and you talked about states and unintended consequences, to the extent that states are considered the incubators, do you see you actually migrating more to a state focus at some point, because that's where you'll have to have the incubator aspect of what you're doing? So the first question is about solutions, and then where you look for those solutions.
So to be clear, I think we spent probably only a few months focused on defining the problem. Once we realized, okay, we're working on polarization, then our focus shifted to who are the organizations that we could fund that have good ideas or solutions in mind for that problem. So really all of our grant making is to support leaders and advocates that are working on different solutions for polarization. It's just that those are the solutions that they've developed and they're working on. We're just funding them to do that. So I don't want to make sense, you know, we aren't admiring the problem on an ongoing basis, but really trying to move money out to people who are working on solutions for it.
And I guess, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt. I guess maybe I define wrong. It seems to me a lot of people are doing a great job of identifying the solutions.
Yeah.
It's taking the concept of the solution and making it a practical resulting solution. That step.
Yes. Yeah, and that's you know, that's where that's the longer run issue. And so and you know, I think one of the things we're using what we call a spread betting approach in our philanthropy. It's just we're making a range of bets in organizations. Some of them are not going to pay off. Some of the solutions that we're investing in now are just by definition are not going to work. Some of them will, we think. The question is right now we don't know which one. So the goal of our initial work is to spread an array of bets and then identify which ones seem to have either are paying off or have better prospects of paying off, and basically doubling down on those bets. So that would be my response there. Now the second question,
did you see how much of this do you see playing out at the state level then?
I think there's a lot. I mean, half of all members of Congress served previously in state legislatures. That's an interesting fact. The districting and the electoral structure through which members of Congress are elected, the vast majority of that is set and administered at the state level. And many of these same aspects of polarization are playing out in different ways at different states. So we are definitely attentive to what's happening at the state level, and some of our grantees are doing work or working with leaders at that level. So while we're focused on Congress on the national level, we certainly aren't blind to what's happening at the states, and some of our work is actively supporting that.
So I promised you a curveball at the end, and I also promised to get you out on time.
Okay.
I've been in the political world for many years now, and my personal solution to what you're doing is that we need an effective, competitive third party, or we need effective, competitive, independent candidates. And this is actually a theory that Charles Whelan from Dartmouth College has been proposing. And we came about it roughly at the same time. I wrote a book that was a fiction book, and he wrote a book called The Centrist Manifesto. But our theory is that if you could find a body of government, let's take the U.S. Senate in his book, where there's 100 people sitting there, and if you could get 5 people elected to be independent and be in the middle, so that neither Republicans or Democrats were in control, you would force this compromise we're talking about. No one would have a majority, and the way the system would work, you may not always get results, but you'd force conversation, you'd force compromise. My theory was, and that's why I kind of ask you about the state level, you have to start this at the state level. I think the lift is too heavy for the U.S. Senate, but you could find states where you could get enough penetration so that neither Republicans or Democrats are in charge, and you could start dialogue, et cetera, et cetera. So these are our 2 theories, and we could go on about that. And you could interview me on a show on that one. But last night I was preparing for our interview and trying to think of ways for you to spend your money. And I had this whole new concept that hit me. So I'm going to run it past you. You don't have to answer, but maybe we'll continue the conversation. What if we could get your foundation or other people to raise, let's say, another $50 or $100 million? And we announce to the public at large that anyone that wants to run as a third-party candidate or independent candidate, if they win, we're going to give them $1 million. So we have now kind of supercharged this notion of getting people to want to run as third-party candidates and independents. And the premise being, again, if enough of them get elected, we break the cycle of polarization. But it seems to me, if we put this bogey out there of if you win, there's $1 million waiting for you, or maybe you get $5 million if you win a U.S. Senate seat. To me, the level of dialogue and the heightened discussion around all this might be a victory enough of where we're going. And then if we got lucky and we found this hypothetical state or this U.S. Senate where our competition resulted in that and so many people getting elected, I mean, that to me is kind of my home run in this. So how can we do this? How can we raise $100 million?
So I have to say, so my attorneys would want us to say this. So as a private foundation, the money we give away is tax advantage. That is that we aren't paying taxes. So the IRS, in its wisdom, rightly said, well, if these guys are, if the funds that they're distributing is tax advantage, they have to be impeccably neutral politically. So as a private foundation, we are completely prevented from supporting or opposing any candidate or party. So I don't think we could contribute to this scheme. But hypothetically speaking, if the question of third parties and independents in American politics is kind of a perennial one, I do think you and Charlie are onto something as you think about, it wouldn't take much. If you had, and I think this is the point you were making, if you had 5 to 10 U.S. senators who might be elected from different states, and of course Maine with Senator King is one example. They have kind of a record of having those types of politicians. That if you had 5 to 10 independents in the United States Senate that were basically working in between the parties, that would be a very interesting dynamic. To have that be, as is the case with most parliaments in the developed world, to have it be more of a coalition government versus one party, a majority and minority party. So I've talked with Charlie about this idea. I think there is something in the long run that could be promising in that, thinking about getting a few more independent senators elected. As a private foundation, that's not something we're in a position to support or oppose.
No, I get the private foundation part. I'm a lawyer by training, and I know there's things there, but I think if Charlie and I sent him an email last night, so we got to talk soon. If we could coalesce and maybe describe this idea, maybe it doesn't come from the foundation world, but maybe if there's enough people like that, we can just kind of jumpstart this. So I'll find you, and I'll let you poke holes at it, and we'll go from there. But
okay.
Daniel, you are a terrific guest. I love what you guys are doing. I wish you all the best, and I'd love to have you back for a rematch maybe in a year, and we can see how things are moving along.
Check in how we're doing, what we've learned, and what didn't work, what did, and how we're doing. That would be great.
Perfect. All the best to you, and all the best to everybody back at the foundation, and keep doing a great work.
Okay, thank you so much. Talk to you later.
Bye.